Okay guys, I just wanted to do a quick tutorial as everyone's having these plumbing repairs done. A few things to think about to help prepare yourself and not have a repeat frozen pipe issue. There's a few things if you think back to your, maybe high school science class when you talked about heat and heat transfer and thermodynamics, things that allow heat to be taken out of an object through one of three means, either convection, conduction, or radiation. And so keeping those three things in mind, think about how you can manipulate each one of those three things in order to help you better protect your pipes. For conduction, what I thought of most was how many times when I was plumbing a house, I brought up a pipe for an outside water spigot, a bib, and strapped it next to a stud right here. And then this would be sticking out of the house. We come back later, we put your faucet on, and for most temperatures that's fine, but when we got down to 0 degrees, that stud right here that's connected to the outside of your house was actually conducting heat away from your house to the outside. And when we lost power, that stud probably got really cold, and not having clearance here next to that stud to put insulation meant that this pipe got as cold as that stud, which eventually got as cold as the outside, creating, the potential for some burst pipes. Something that we can do better in that regard is, instead of a regular copper 90, we use a drop 90, which we can then strap in the middle of two studs, maybe pull it back further in the wall, get good pipe insulation on that, insulate here, and put your bib there, and you don't have the conduction of that stud losing heat to the outside. And the same thing can be done, using PEX system. This is what I have in my home. It's exactly what I did. I came up through the crawl space under the house into the wall in the middle of two studs, insulated that. I have a nipple that's insulated, and the hose bib and a vacuum breaker for a backflow device on that. And that's the setup I have. And there's something that goes even beyond that, which north of our area is very common. It's called the frost proof. You've probably seen videos on this where the actual water shuts off here and then can drain out, so you don't have water to freeze in here. This connection ideally would be in the closer inside the insulation or in closer to the conditioned part of your home. The problem is, like for me, I have 2x4 exterior studs, so I would have to use a very small one with that. And so I'm really only gaining a couple inches there of piping that's not going to have water in it. And that could make a difference, maybe not as much as I would like. So what I considered doing was running one main line to a central point inside of my home where I can put a shutoff here, and then run lines from here to each of my bibs. So I can actually then turn the water off to each one of my outside spigots and never have to worry about covering them. You probably can't do that unless you're doing a significant remodel or building new, but it's definitely something to think about. Maybe being able to isolate your bibs, just drain them down, maybe even have a way to pump air through to get all of the water out so you don't have to worry about freezes. It's important, if you are going to use frost proofs, in our area some of those froze, and I really firmly believe that the reason is because this little piece that comes with it was discarded. Its job is to make sure that when this is installed, it's not flat, it's not pitched backwards, but it has just a slight fall to grade so that the water will actually run out and this will be completely dry. So make sure whatever you do, it's done right. And I decided to cover my bibs for the freeze, and actually came out okay, but I didn't rely just solely on this little styrofoam cover. I actually filled anywhere where air may move with batt insulation, and this piece of insulation goes around the stub out all the time. Other things to think about as you're having these repairs done, think about the convection. Heat's always rising. It does the same thing in your house. If you have pipes in your attic, this is most important. Don't run the pipes up in free space in drafty areas, whether it's in a crawl space or your attic. Put them in places where they're going to be least efficient at convection, heat just moving through space into the air, transferring the heat from your pipes into open air. And then the last thing would be your insulation. It's important that two things. This is insulation from your typical home store. It's pretty thin. That's like a 3/8 wall insulation, and you can see what happened to this PVC pipe. The failure here wasn't necessarily the insulation's fault. This PVC pipe would have frozen with better insulation on it. But most of this pipe had double layer insulation on it, but this insulation didn't even fit around the pipe. So this piece of PVC was just history. So you can see it's actually just shredded. What could have been done better, this is insulation from an actual plumbing supplier. You can see this is actual 1-inch thick insulation. This particular insulation is meant to go around 1-inch diameter pipe. And this is what I use anytime I'm not inside a wall. Anytime I'm going to be exposed either outside, in an attic, or in a crawl space, 1-inch wall insulation. This stuff's not that expensive. It's worth the extra expense. It's certainly cheaper than a broken pipe. And it's also critical that it's installed correctly. I see a lot of things that are not done exactly right, like, you know, kind of a butt joint at these corners, and there's no way to really close that off. There's two methods I like to use to do corners. The first one is an actual miter cut, wherein you have these two picture frames that go together like so. And when they meet, they close very well, very tight, and that's an easy corner to tape and make airtight. The second one that I like to do sometimes is to actually do a partial miter, where I'll cut a 45-degree V without going all the way through. Let that fall, and then that closes at a 45. This one's a little more than a 45, but you can see now that's actually still intact, and I'm only concerned with taping off this portion of the joint. Either one of those work pretty well. The other thing to consider is when you have this kind of insulation outside, this is a 3/4 wall insulation that's been outside for about 5 years, and it's real brittle. It's deteriorating, it's crumbly, and look at the tape. Duct tape and insulation don't last outside in the sun, so be mindful that you might need to update your insulation every few years. Cover it with some sort of ultraviolet protective paint or tape or something. We sometimes wrap with PVC tape, but even PVC doesn't hold up to the sun all that well. So I think and then the last thing that I talked about was radiation. That would mean actually applying some sort of energy to your pipes, whether it be some source of heat. The problem with that we've experienced is that when you lose power, that one's going to be really difficult. So really hone in on where you put your pipes, how they're run, and how well they're insulated. Pipes in your attic should be close to the ceiling, close to that heat source that's coming up through the sheetrock, and then if you can, tint over it with your insulation. Insulate it with pipe insulation, and then if you can tint your attic insulation, if you have it sitting on top of your ceiling, over the pipe, hold in as much of that heat as you can, cut down on convection and conduction, and if you can, apply radiation of some sort of energy, some sort of heat source. My friend John Hallmark made a good video about how to protect a hot water heater, tankless water heater outside by just sticking an old spool of incandescent Christmas lights inside there and plugging it in. And as long as you have power, something like that's a great idea. I think that's all I have for now. Hope you all are doing well and get everything sorted out.